Thank you everyone for joining us this evening for the vigil for a ceasefire. Now, we've organised this because obviously the situation in Gaza is absolutely awful and terrible. But we are asking for a ceasefire first and foremost, because that is where we see some traction of some peace happening. And we here, gathered here today, are following the Oxfam call, which is for a ceasefire, for the release of all prisoners everywhere in that area, and for all the political parties in the UK to support that ceasefire.
So Stroud District Together with Refugees is also supporting the calls that Oxfam and others have made. First of all, absolute ceasefire on all sides, end of the blockade, humanitarian aid in, and a safe passage for people out, and return of all hostages. If we're going to help break the cycle of blame, revenge and violence, we have to call first of all for a complete end to the violence, and to listen and go on listening to the stories and suffering of everyone involved. We're thinking of them all just now. The families in Israel who have just lost people to slaughter and hostage taking, as well as the situation in Gaza, the horrifying and worsening situation there for millions. At least locally, whatever our alliances, affinities and identities, let us keep talking and listening, respecting and wishing each other well. Let's do all we can to prevent division being reflected in Stroud. In terms of refugees, it's noticeable that the weeks of relentless anti-refugee rhetoric from senior Tories, especially the Home Secretary, has stopped in the last 2 weeks. Could it be that the terrible plight of people in Gaza who may long to escape but cannot is shaming that rhetoric? Meanwhile, Lord Dubs, who was brought here himself on kinder transport from Austria as a child, while he expresses deep resonance with the pain of Jewish communities targeted in Israel, he has also called for safe routes, a safe route scheme for Palestinians to come to the UK. We did it for Ukraine, we can do it for Palestine. So I like to think that today we're feeling each other's grief, which is a prerequisite to understanding and then to a just peace.
The violence in Palestine must end. We know that the tragic events of October 7th was not the beginning. For more than 50 years, settler colonialism, illegal occupation, have been using violence to contain, suppress, and displace Palestinian people. 50 years of demolition of homes, of evictions, burning of crops in olive groves, imprisonment of children. And now the indiscriminate bombing of hospitals, churches and mosques, of whole residential areas, all trapped inside a closed, barbed wire concentration camp. More than 50 years of apartheid. People, we are seeing genocide. We can't turn our eyes away from genocide. We know what genocide looks like. The Trail of Tears and the genocide against Native Americans, the denial of land rights and the removals of indigenous people in Australia, the stealing of millions of Africans for enslavement. The Holocaust, always driven and enabled by racism, largely against people of color. This is the 21st century, people, and yet again we are witnessing people of color being cleansed from their land while the world watches. Never again means never again for all people. We must stand against genocide by any and all governments. Millions of people in the world are doing just that, and thank you everyone for coming today. While the US and the UK promises more arms, yet more arms to aid the destruction of Palestine. We must demand that our government, the opposition, faith, and community leaders all join in the simple demand for an immediate ceasefire and the opening of routes for aid. The hostages in the basements and in the prisons must be released. The bombing and supply of bombs must stop. The root cause, the illegal occupation, must be ended. Thank you very much.
My name's James Beecher, but I'm just going to read a statement from the Executive Committee of Jews for Justice for Palestinians, which was their letter written to the Prime Minister, published a few days ago, and sent to me by my mum. As an organisation of British Jews, we are desperately concerned about the Gaza situation and how it might end, given recent Israeli government statements. Many of our members and supporters have close relatives who perished or otherwise suffered in the Holocaust. We stand by the principle of never again to anyone. We were horrified by the Hamas attack on Israeli civilians on the 7th of October. However, the Israeli government has chosen to visit retribution on the mass of the civilian Gaza population who played no part whatever in it. The Palestinian death toll resulting from Israel's heavy bombardment has already exceeded 3,000 at the time of writing, including hundreds of children. Access to food, water, power and medical supplies have been heavily restricted, which will lead to further deaths among the civilian population from starvation, disease and untreated injuries. None of this can rationally be considered as Israel defending itself. Rather, it is collective punishment on a massive scale, morally wrong and a war crime. The instruction to the people living in the northern Gaza Strip to move south, which has been strongly condemned on humanitarian grounds, is understood by many as the beginning of attempted population transfer, another war crime. The UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide defines genocide as certain acts, quote, committed with intent to destroy in whole or part a national, ethnical, racial or religious group as such. These include killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, and deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, actions which are currently in play. Statements reported from members of the Israeli government are chillingly indicative of genocidal intent. Dehumanizing language has also been used in the public arena by certain TV channels. A scholar of the Holocaust and genocide has warned that, quote, Israel's genocidal assault on Gaza is quite explicit, open and unashamed, end quote. We, therefore, as British Jews, appeal to you, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, to use the UK's influence to end the current all-out attack on the people of Gaza and to pull Israel back from the brink.
I'll start with this. No words. I've got no words to describe how I feel when presented with this daily horror. All I can say is, I will not be a bystander. I will bear witness to this. I will not be a bystander while children die in the name of an old man's war. I'm going to reiterate the Oxfam call because I absolutely wholly endorse this. We will not be bystanders. Immediate ceasefire now. Nothing can justify violence towards any civilians. Anyone held captive must be released. End the blockade that is preventing civilians in Gaza from accessing food, fuel and water. Let's not forget, this is a war crime. Denying food, water, energy is a war crime. Call for a path to real and lasting peace for Palestinian and Israeli people. That's all we can ask for. I will not be a bystander